Hey guys, Danny here. I hope you're all doing well. Today we are taking a look at a drone. This was sent to me for review, and as always, if you'd like to pick it up, you can find a link down in the description. You may notice some slight artifacts in my video today, as it's so hot in the UK right now. It was causing some problems with some of my camera equipment, which is pretty basic because my channel is still fairly small, so please just bear that in mind if you notice anything strange in the video. Now, some interesting things about this drone is it is coming in at under 249 grams, and it also has quite an impressive flying time and a 2-axis gimbal. But this drone isn't perfect, however. I'm a bit torn on whether I would recommend it or not, so please stick around and watch the rest of the video if you are thinking of picking this up. Let's first take a look at the controller. My initial impressions were pretty good, however the finish on the plastic does feel quite cheap. The design of the controller is fine and it does feel quite sturdy. The buttons feel nice and clicky. The joysticks have a nice amount of give to them and they do recenter when you let go. And you have two LEDs in the middle which give you a charging indication and when the controller is connected. So this is using a inbuilt battery which you may be able to remove. I haven't actually tried, but there's some screws underneath. But yes, you can charge this up using a micro USB. You'll notice in this shot that there's some plastic stuck to the controller. I had removed this in the previous shots. For some reason the packaging got stuck to the controller. I have no idea why, but I was able to remove it without any problems. The phone holder that this comes with is not built into the controller, which I do prefer, as it's just, one less thing you have to lose. Once clicked into place, it does feel robust enough to hold most phones. I'm using a Xiaomi Mi 9T. And of course, let's take a look at the drone. You will see it has the 2-axis gimbal on the front. It does have a pretty small form factor. It's not foldable like the JJRC X9PS for example that I recently reviewed, so I will be making some comparisons to that. You have a pretty big gap in the back where your battery sits, and this is using apparently an improved motor system to give increased flying time, so we'll be testing that out too. You do have some LED lights underneath as well, and a bottom facing camera which is used for optical flow positioning. My thoughts on the build quality of the drone are a little bit mixed. Also, the finish and fit of the plastic just feels and looks a little bit cheap. It definitely shouldn't cause you any major issues as it feels fairly robust, but just beyond that, I don't think it looks too great. Now you may be thinking I'm being a little bit harsh, but in my mind I am comparing this to the JJRC X9PS, which is around a similar price point, has a similar design in terms of its size and weight. So when I compare it to that, it just doesn't quite hold up to the same level of quality. But competition is good as it will benefit us, the end user, as the different companies are going to try their best to improve these drones. It's also worth considering that they are trying their best to limit the weight to get this under regulation in certain countries. Charging up the batteries takes about an hour and a half. I have the version which comes with one battery. There is two versions, a 2 battery and a 3 battery version. I would advise at least going for the 2 battery version. I have this one as it was able to be sent to me sooner, and I wanted to get this review done as quickly as I could for all of you to see. I have another small nitpick with this drone, and it may seem a little bit petty, but this flap on the back makes taking the micro SD card in and out a little bit more fiddly than I think it needs to be. Putting it in isn't too difficult, but when you try and take it out, it can take a little while, depending on the length of your fingernails, to kind of grab the SD and pull it out. So small detail, but I figure it's worth mentioning. Getting this drone into a flight ready state was quite a frustrating experience, as the user manual it comes with seems to be out of date for an older version. The app that it points you to doesn't actually work anymore. It's not on the Play Store. There is another app you can download which I will link you to, but if you follow the steps I used here, and then instead of connecting to the drone's Wi-Fi, you connect to the controller's Wi-Fi and you should be good to go. I did 2 separate flight tests and I used the official version that's recommended by the manual, which is an older version that I found online, and I also did another flight test which you're seeing here, which is using the C-Fly app, and as far as I could tell they looked pretty identical, so anything I say about the app should carry over to the official version. Doing a gyro and compass calibration was pretty straightforward. You can go into the settings and do this yourself with a little guide. I was surprised that it didn't ask you to do this before you took off. It may actually stop you from taking off if you haven't done this. I can't confirm because in both tests, of course, I just did this calibration anyway, which you should. For some reason, this drone seemed quite slow at connecting to satellites. It hovered around 7 or 8 for a while, and then it seemed after I took off on both tests, then it gradually connected to more. On the second test, I did wait a little bit longer before I took off, but it still seemed really slow, so this could have affected some of my flight performance. On both flight tests, the drone seemed to have a little bit of trouble keeping steady. Even though I did a compass and gyro calibration, it would hold its position in a relative area, but you can see here it does move around a bit. It did have a tendency to change its altitude by itself, so I did have to make a few efforts to correct that. It was a bit windy, but still that shouldn't really be enough for the drone to drift around. It wasn't so extreme that I was ever worried that the drone was going to fly off, or I didn't really feel like I was in control. But it moved around enough that if you was doing this in a pretty confined area or maybe an urban environment, then I think it's not really up to par on some other drones that I've tested. Of course, this could be based on the amount of satellites that I'm connected to, but on both my tests I did seem to have this problem. Because of this, during flight I also experienced some delay in my controls. So for example, when I would move the drone and then take my hands off of the controls for it to center itself, it had a slight toilet bowl effect where it would take a moment to recenter itself and almost find its position, which just feels like you have less control of the drone and is something, to be honest, a lot of GPS drones suffer with. Here I'm doing a short range test, one to test the Wi-Fi feed and see how responsive the drone is at a distance. The Wi-Fi feed in general throughout my whole flight experience seemed to be pretty solid. I didn't have any major issues. Even when I got to up to 200 meters, the Wi-Fi feed seemed relatively stable. I then hit the return to home button on the controller, as you're not able to use the touchscreen controls when you are using the controller at the same time. You'll see the drone raises up to a preset height, which is pretty normal for drones to do, and then it returned back to me pretty quickly. In my second flight test, this seemed very good as well. The drone was very quick and fast at turning and coming back to me. It felt very nice and responsive. Using the wheel on the side of the controller, you can use this to pan the camera up and down, which is always nice to have as it lets you get nice shots like this one. You can cancel return to home by holding the button on the controller. The drone did return pretty close to where I took it off from, and it will normally never be 100%, and as I said before, can be dependent on your GPS signal, but this performed fine I thought, and I felt like it returned to me pretty promptly and no issues. I had some issues with my camera on the second flight test when I was testing the smart features that this drone has. It has orbiting and also a tracking feature. Neither of them worked to any degree that would even be worth me showing you anyway. I had a very similar problem with the MJX Bugs B7, but with this one I felt like it was a bit worse and it didn't really give very good guidance on how to use the features, which is kind of a reoccurring issue with this app. It's not very user friendly, and so far that's been my experience with this drone. It just lacks refinement and just overall usability, so that is definitely something to consider if you are thinking of picking this drone up. I was hoping with GPS mode turned off, the drone would feel more responsive and snappy. Maybe it was due to the wind on this day, but I just didn't really feel much of a difference, and the drone felt quite sluggish at times and like it often was struggling for power. It does have a decent amount of maneuverability that you could fly this in low wind and have quite a bit of fun with it. But flying it in wind like I was here, there was a few occasions where I did actually struggle to return the drone to me because there was wind pushing it in the direction away, but you can still have a fair amount of fun with it, and it is a decent flyer. I'm not saying it's bad by any means, but comparing this to, again, the MJX Bugs B7, which felt more refined and more powerful. Now I've used that drone, I think I'm seeing this one in maybe a different light than if I hadn't used the MJX B7. Last but not least, let's take a look at some photo and video from the camera. I have to say I was a little bit disappointed with the camera here. It does offer more advanced shots because of its stabilized gimbal, but you do get a little bit of a shaking effect. I think this is probably due to the camera itself, not actually the gimbal moving around, but I could be wrong. The files unfortunately only come out at full HD at 22 frames a second, which is a little bit of an odd frame rate. This camera does state it's 4K. I'm guessing maybe they were talking about the photos, but unless the app I'm using is putting out the wrong video files, which I doubt, then this doesn't actually seem to be a full 4K camera, at least when you talk about video anyway. With some good lighting on a nice bright day like this one, you can get some pretty good shots, but I do feel like this camera isn't offering anything better than some other drones at this price point. As always, I will leave this for you to judge yourself, and I'll put some pictures up on screen so you can see what the stills are like. And that brings us to the end of the video. I really hope I was able to help you make up your mind if you want to pick up this drone or not, and share my experience with you. As always, if you'd like to pick it up, you can find a link down in the description. My final thoughts on this product are a little bit mixed. I wouldn't discourage you from picking it up if that's what you want to do, but I would say that it does need some refinement. The app experience isn't great, and it isn't very user friendly, and you do need to do a little bit of tinkering to figure it out and get it to work properly. But beyond that, it's not a bad drone. It has some strong points and some weak points too. I really hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up. If you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing for more videos like this one. And of course, I will see you in the next one.